Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 194 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. As all you listeners know, I've always spent a lot of time reading about photography. I read historical sources, I read other photographers and what they have said and writing about what they have thought. I read writing about the theory and the concepts of photography, and a lot of those things have made their way into the podcast, and not coincidentally into my workshops and the other classes that I teach as well. In addition to reading about photography in particular, I occasionally find especially interesting things in other sources that somehow intersect with photography. I suppose this tendency is part of my interest in coming at photography, and I guess a lot of other things too, from the side. Sometimes we can learn a lot about the creative process by reading things that aren't inherently about the creative process. By turning a corner or two or backing up a little bit and taking a running start at something, we can find ourselves learning about our medium by looking at something that isn't immediately about what we do. A great example of this is a book that I read some time ago. It's titled Dark Water: Art, Disaster, and Redemption in Florence, and it's written by Robert Clark. It's a book that tells the story of the 1966 floods that devastated the city of Florence in Italy and its renowned art masterpieces. I'm sure it was the occasion of the 50th anniversary of this terrible flood that had me looking over my bookshelves and finding this book again. And I suppose a little background is in order here. On November the 4th of 1966, a set of circumstances, weather and geography and a bunch of other things, conspired to allow the Arno River, the river that runs right through the heart of the city of Florence, to crest its banks. Florence is often referred to as the cradle of the Renaissance and contains thousands of extremely important artworks, and it was inundated with up to 20 feet of water. The flood killed 33 people, and it damaged more than 14,000 pieces of artwork and countless books and antiques. As the floodwaters receded, thousands of volunteers came to Florence to help save the art and architecture and books and artifacts that had been under many feet of water and mud. These people became known as Mud Angels, and they were instrumental in helping to save much of what we're able to see in Florence today. Of course, I love Italy and Florence, or Firenze in Italian, and the stunning works of art that it contains. So the fascinating stories of how some of the most important works were saved, along with the history and geomechanics of how and why Florence has sometimes flooded, all of that really interested me. But it was another part of the story that I really responded to, as Clark also uses his pages to give his thoughts on the intertwined relationship between art and life. The book is as much about why we value art and where that value comes from as it is about the water and the mud and the saviors of the artwork. Toward the end of the book is a passage that I read over and over again. Here it is for you. But the art in an artwork might not be located precisely where you thought it was. Perhaps it is just as much in the damage and decay as it was in the intact original. Perhaps it was in the gaps, in contemplating and rendering those insults and injuries that we find ourselves by compassion, by bandaging, however imperfectly, those wounds. Art may be a species of faith, the assurance of things hoped for. It contains nothing so much as our wish that we persist. So I'm going to reread at least a couple of parts of that. It starts out by saying, but the art in an artwork might not be located precisely where you thought it was. And it ends by saying, art may be a species of faith, the assurance of things hoped for. It contains nothing so much as our wish that we persist. Wow, man, that idea that art may be a species of faith, the assurance of things hoped for, was something that just knocked me over. It made me think about what it is that drives me creatively. But it was the next sentence that really sealed the deal for me. Art contains nothing so much as our wish that we persist. Our wish that we persist, that the things we saw and loved and wanted and valued are just an outward sign of who we are. That art embodies our own desire to leave a mark on the world that we inhabit. Well, I don't know about you, but that sort of idea makes me want to find a project that is near and dear to me and to begin to work on it, to extend that wish that I persist. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Camera Position, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the podcast about the creative side of photography.